Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the sanctimoniously notorious RMB, here on a Saturday for this Robservations live chat number 193. Robservations, of course, being the show about something. There, of course, is Gilbert traipsing through the screen as he is wont to do. And, of course, I have to dab my forehead again because I'm hot. Not hot as in I was hot in my younger days, but I'm literally hot today. Hot under the collar, as it were. Lots going on. First of all, I want to welcome all of you, imagination connoisseurs, members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, for being here. Also, I want to remind you, as always, these chats are brought to you by, say it with me now, Lucky Tiger men's grooming products. For what? For those men who want to look good and feel great. That is right. They're sponsoring me. They're sponsoring the channel. They're just an all-around great company, and you should support them by going to getluckytiger.com, and you can use PGS for Post-Geek Singularity Community and get 20, well, don't say community, just punch in PGS and you get 20% off your order. Don't say I never did anything for you or that they haven't done anything for you, because they do. They support the channel. They keep these chats going. So thank Alan Murphy, the CEO of, I guess he's president. He told me president, not CEO, but he did say that. So thanks to Alan Murphy and everybody at Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products. I love them. I need more of their facial scrub. However, anyway, boy, today, a lot of stuff happened this week that has, I don't know, it's made me think, rethink my life goals, rethink my time on planet Earth, actually. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, basically had an extinction type event occur. An amateur astronomer caught a photograph, was able to catch a photograph with his, I mean, it's amazing what amateur astronomers can do now with their own computer equipment. You don't need a supercomputer to capture a stellar event. But look it up. There are pictures of it. Something hit Jupiter. And I had some people say, I did call it an extinction level event on Twitter. And people said, well, judging from the kind of light emitted, it was only 200 meters across or whatever hit. I'm like, you know what? Okay, it might not have been an extinction level event, but even the red spot on Jupiter, even though it's dwindling, is 2.5 times the size of the Earth. So when you can see a giant stellar event, when you can see something that hit Jupiter that can be captured in a photograph, to me, it's just damn scary. And it got me thinking, you know what? For all the problems on this planet, whatever hit Jupiter this week would have taken us all out. So we should thank our lucky stars that we have a large stellar body like Jupiter in the neighborhood that is attracting things like this. So, you know, when life gets bad, think about what happened to Jupiter this week. Jupiter got punched in the face by the cosmos, and it didn't look like it was fun. And it certainly wouldn't have been fun if it happened anywhere on this planet. Something else happened on this planet, apparently, that isn't even making headline news, although people are talking about it. Apparently, there was some kind of a massive nuclear accident in Russia. If you haven't been following the news, it's very interesting. I tweeted out that, oh my God, Craig Mazin. I didn't say Craig Mazin. I go, apparently, this is HBO's way of greenlighting season 2 of Chernobyl. I don't really mean that. I did tweet that, but I thought it was kind of funny. So apparently Russia has a new hypersonic cruise missile that can travel 8 times the speed of sound. That is a city killer. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't defend against it. And they were testing it, and apparently something happened. Now, if it was a live fire exercise, I would say to Putin and his military, if you're going to test a nuclear missile, perhaps not use nuclear material while you're testing it. I don't mean to be glib. People apparently have died. They're buying iodine pills all through Russia. It's basically not a good thing. I would have thought that common sense would have prevailed and we would have realized the futility of having nuclear weapons. But instead of mutually assured destruction now, we're just making weapons that we can get away with destruction occasionally, which, you know, not such a good thing. Which brought me to thinking about a lot of other things. About the death of common sense, for instance. Whatever happened to American salt of the earth, ingenuity, and the way we think about things? Like, I always go back and forth with people about climate change on the earth and man-made climate change. And a lot of people, whether it's proven or disproven, everyone's like, you know, there's climate change all the time. There's never not been climate change. It's true, because I'm willing to bet you today, August 10th, if you go back a year, to August 10th, 2018, and then go back a year before that, August 10th, 2017, that wherever you are on the planet, I'll bet you the temperature is not the same as it was a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Whether it was higher or lower, that just means, yes, there's constant climate change. People are always telling me, like, I love the people that are saying, well, there's no man-made climate change. There's CO2 is not the only thing. I get all that. I understand. But how about this? I always say this. You don't leave your kitchen 10% dirty, right? You don't. The Trump administration has taken away environmental protection controls. They've allowed drilling, and they've allowed, you can, I guess, have a certain amount of industrial runoff. Here's the thing. Just like your kitchen, why is it that we don't think that our closed biosphere is worth protecting? I don't understand why do we want any particulate matter in the atmosphere? Why do we want the oceans to have higher temperatures? Why do we allow, clearly there's plastic gyres in the ocean. The Pacific Gyre is huge. It's not the only gyre. There are, I mean, look up the Pacific Gyre. And we just accept it. You know, hey, let's get rid of plastic bags in 10 years. Let's not make drinking straws out of plastic anymore. Okay. But still, the Pacific Gyre is there. The Great Barrier Reef is dying because of acid in the ocean and the rising temperatures. You know, Greenland lost billions of tons of water. Now, this is not water that is already in the water, like ice, which if ice melts that's already in the water, it's fine. It's already been displaced. We all get displacement. I've got ice in my glass, my Johnny Rockets glass. We all know when the ice melts, the level of water in my glass is not going to change. However, if the ice that's on land, such as we saw in Greenland, starts to melt and dumps billions of gallons into the ocean, that was ice or water that wasn't there. That makes the sea level go up. But you know, anyway, these are three-dimensional problems. That's all I'm saying. Three-dimensional problems. You can't look at one aspect of a problem and go, oh, you know what? We'll solve this problem by doing this. No. There's many different factors. There's many different things that have to be done. And I feel like our political system and our leaders and even us, even the way we view problems is we want these single bullet solutions to take care of our problems. That's not the way the world works. I mean, everyone says, you know, climate change, climate science is incredibly complex. Yeah, because there's like 10 million different variables that play into it. But I'll tell you what doesn't play into it. When you're talking about climate science, the idea that we're spewing particulate matter into our closed ecosystem, whether, you know, how is that a good thing? I understand with the Industrial Revolution, it was all new. 150 years ago, coal and burning things and all that certainly wasn't on the mass scale that it is today. So common sense would say that, hey, we're spewing more particulate matter into the atmosphere than we ever have before. And we're still clear cutting in the Amazon. And the Amazon is basically like the lungs of our planet. We're not good about these things. We're not good about solving these problems. We all want quick fixes, and we're not looking at problems three-dimensionally, and it makes me annoyed because I'll tell you why. Working on movies, one of the great things about working on motion pictures, even though President Trump said Hollywood is terrible yesterday, one of the great things about working on movies is that when you're working on a film, you've got a team of people that are thinking three-dimensionally, and they're thinking three-dimensionally all the time. It's like, okay, let's say we need to get a location. Let's say the location is in 90210's Peach Pit, because everyone knows that 902 came back this week. People are wondering whether they like it or not because it's more of a meta look. Our characters are playing themselves, but not. Anyway, let's say we're going to shoot in the Peach Pit. You know, we need a restaurant, a diner that our kids hang out in. We got the Peach Pit. If you're making a movie, you have to start asking yourselves questions like, okay, can the Peach Pit be a practical location? Practical location is a location that already exists. If you decide, okay, we're going to go shoot on a practical location, you have to figure out, all right, well, a practical location, if you're going to shoot on a practical location, what do you need for a film crew? Like, think about it. Like, ask yourselves, if you want to bring a film crew to a practical location, meaning that it's a restaurant that already exists, what are some of the first things that you must take into consideration? First of all, one of the first things is parking. Where are you going to put the crew? You might have 200 people coming. How are you going to get 200 people, the crew, to park in a reasonable, where they can walk or whatever? Then, how are you going to power your film crew? How are you going to power all the lights? Probably you can't just plug into wall sockets. You got to bring your own generator. And if you bring your own generator, I mean, Tallulah is excited about this topic. If you bring your own generator, where are you going to put it? Is it going to bother other restaurants or other establishments? You have to go to all those other establishments and ask, we're going to be shooting. Do you have problems? Are you going to block the sidewalk? What are you going to do? Then you have to ask yourself, like, okay, you're going to have to feed this crew. Are you going to use the restaurant that you're shooting in to actually make the food? Or do you have to bring in caterers? Then you have to have security. You see where I'm going with this. There's a million different things that you have to decide on before you can go shoot at a practical location. Or after weighing those options, you can say, you know what? Where we want to shoot, this isn't going to work. Maybe we should shoot on a set. Okay, well, where? You've got to find that set. You got to figure out where that's going to be. Do you go to LA Center, where half the TV shows in America are shot? Are you going to go there because they've got standing sets? And if they do have standing sets, you got to think about, how are you going to dress it? Is it going to look like a 50s diner? Do you want it to look something new? You got to get extras, of course, to fill it up, which is true if you're shooting on location. But there's a million different questions for every decision that you make on a movie. And you have a team of people that they don't sit around and wonder about how to fix these problems. You've got a team of people that are experts in their fields, and they sit down and they basically have to figure these problems out a couple hours. That's why working on a movie is great. They figure these problems out and you execute. And you do this on a daily basis. And sometimes if you're shooting on a movie like Superman Returns, you're doing this for 180 days. You're on location for months at a time. And these problems are solved on a daily basis. And I know from working on films and watching film crews work, how problems can be solved. Problems that are three-dimensional, how quickly they can be solved if people really want to put their minds to doing it. And the great thing about movie making is it's all common sense problem solving. There's nothing, you don't have to come up with some esoteric reasons. There is methodologies in place that have worked for nearly a century. And they come into play and you fix the problems and you execute and you get it done. Get the job done. So it's easy to figure out. So in a roundabout way, I've been thinking about between the Democratic debates, between President Trump, between what's going on in Russia and what happened, the aftermath of 3 mass shootings in a week. We're listening to all kinds of stuff happening. And, I even read something interesting, how a leftist journalist, somebody on the left, which I would consider normally to be my side of the aisle, but the left has gone insane. I read a really interesting article. So for those of you who don't know, there's a thing called the intellectual dark web. And the intellectual dark web gained in popularity over the last 2 years. And people that are part of this intellectual dark web, I started to notice it with a guy named Jordan Peterson, who basically wrote a book called The 12 Rules of Life. And he was he became famous. He's an academic. He is a clinical psychologist. And he's a practicing psychologist, and he was a faculty member, maybe he still is, at the University of Toronto. Well, anyway, so Jordan Peterson wrote this book called 12 Rules for Life, and he gained notoriety because he came out against enforced speech in Canada, where basically what he was doing was he was fighting against the idea that trans people should have compelled speech if you want to address them, because they don't want to be misgendered and all of that. So the government of Canada came out and said, there was a big push to make sure, in order to be more tolerant of our trans brothers and sisters, or did I just misgender an entire group of people? I don't mean to, but using the proper pronouns to address them, that kind of thing. Jordan Peterson came out against it. He was vehemently opposed to this because he didn't believe the government should step in and pass legislation to control speech. And he was branded a transphobic person. And all this stuff happened when really, if you really looked at his arguments, he was talking about compelled speech. This just happened to be the fulcrum. And of course, he came out and said, where does that end? Where does compelled speech end? That's what he was really dealing with. But anyway, so the intellectual dark web over the last 2 years, Brett Weinstein and his brother, who's an economist, people like Dave Rubin, who left the Young Turks and started his own show. So basically what the intellectual dark web was a group of people that were at first branded alt-right, but really they were just disenchanted leftists that have gone more centrist. But they basically started dialogue. So if you go online and you look at all these people, they have long form dialogue shows. I like them. I like to watch all kinds of things on YouTube. I went down the rabbit hole watching a 24-year-old's YouTube channel, this girl named Shelby Church, who's been on YouTube since 2009. Not somebody I normally would watch, but she actually had some pretty informative videos about making money on YouTube and things like that. And I was very impressed by the quality of her videos. She uses good cameras. She's a good editor. She's actually a pretty great filmmaker, I have to say, even though, it's not normally somebody I would even be on my radar. But Elizabeth and I watched Shelby Church videos for like an hour and a half yesterday, and I learned a great deal. So you just never know when you're going to learn from somebody. But anyway, so Jordan Peterson has been pilloried by a number of people. A lot of people like him. He's made a lot of money. He's toured with Dave Rubin, and they've gone all over the world and lectured. And basically, so Jordan Peterson wrote this book, The 12 Rules of Life, I think it's called. His first rule is clean up your room. And basically, Jordan Peterson's audience is young, disaffected men that are looking for their place in the world. And he has been criticized for that. And he's been labeled alt-right. He's been yelled and screamed about by all kinds of different people. Until this week, I read an article. It was written by a woman. I don't even know where I read it. So basically it came out. I mean, maybe it was on Gizmodo or something. I don't know. But it basically, the article was saying that all of the mass shootings that are happening in the United States, and everybody's screaming about gun laws and whether somebody was Antifa or whether they were alt-right or whatever, that the idea is many of these men share common traits. A lot of them are in their early 20s. A lot of them have manifestos. And the article that I read this week was pointing out that the only person that's trying to speak to these men is Jordan Peterson. And yet for the last 2 years, people have been going after him. Now, I am certainly not a Jordan Peterson disciple. I've never read any of his books, although he did write a book that interests me, that I've read some of. I haven't read the whole thing about it. That has nothing to do with this, but it was more about making meaning. And the reason that I even came across it was because I took a coordinated studies program at the Evergreen State College called The Making of Meaning. That still to this day I find interesting. And that's when I was reading Jung. And I read a book by a guy named Edward T. Hall called The Hidden Dimension, about the spaces that we build for ourselves architecturally. Anyway, it was a class that meant something to me, and I that's how I first discovered Jordan Peterson in the first place. But anyway, so I thought it was interesting that finally somebody's recognizing that, oh, Jordan Peterson is going after, we see now that we have a problem with young men. And yes, certainly we have a gun problem. We have lots of other problems, but the root cause are these young disaffected men who are being radicalized in whatever way, whether they're incels or however they're being radicalized, they're being radicalized. Well, Jordan Peterson is a man that is going and lecturing to these very people and trying to prevent that radicalization from happening. And it was actually recognized this week. And I was like, well, once again, a three-dimensional problem where somebody is really starting to try and go to the root cause of things. Why does any of this matter? Why am I talking about any of this? I'll tell you why. Because just today, I'm going to read something to you. I'm going to read this from Deadline. This is on Deadline this morning. And for those of you who don't know, Blumhouse, who has been killing it, Insidious, you all know Blumhouse now. They brought back M. Night Shyamalan. Split was a Blumhouse movie. Whiplash was a Blumhouse movie, not a horror film. Us. They've just been killing it with all the horror films that have been coming out over the last couple of years. And Jason Blum has figured out a great model, make movies started out as 5 million or under. Now it's 20 million or under. The new Halloween was a Blumhouse movie. They're going to be doing a 2-part follow-up, new Halloween movies. So Blumhouse has figured out a model by which they are very successful by making movies for under $20 million, releasing them theatrically and making money, which is a good thing. They have a movie coming out next month, or they had a movie coming out next month called The Hunt. And The Hunt follows in a long tradition of films about human beings hunting other human beings, all the way back to 1932's The Most Dangerous Game, which is, of course, a literary adaptation. You know, man is the most dangerous game. How many movies have we seen with human beings hunting other human beings? There's The Running Man, for instance. One of my favorites was an early 80s Australian exploitation movie starring Olivia Hussey and Steve Railsback called Turkey Shoot, that was actually released in this country as Escape 2000. And it's got some great gore in it, a lot of great kills, as we say, if we love horror movies, as I do. The Hostel films, you had other human beings killing other human beings for entertainment and certainly for the audience. Anyway, so what was interesting to me about that is The Hunt is coming out, and it was immediately labeled, no one's seen it yet, but it was labeled as a movie about liberals killing deplorables, because one of the great actresses from Glow is in the film, and I guess she has a Southern accent. So it was picked up that that's what the movie was actually about. There's no evidence necessarily to suggest this movie is about liberals killing deplorables, but that was how it was reported. It was picked up by the media. Anyway, so today, Universal made an announcement. Universal Pictures, I read from Deadline. This is a Deadline article by Anthony D'Alessandro. Anthony D'Alessandro writes, Universal will not be releasing Blumhouse's The Hunt on September 27th as planned. Deadline hears that a collective decision was made by Universal leadership, led by Donna Langley, with the Hunt filmmaking team. For this particular film, it's better to wait. The question is, wait for what? We all know, but we're going to wait. The news of Universal canceling The Hunt comes in the wake of the studio putting the brakes on the Pix marketing campaign in the wake of the mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, and Gilroy, California, which is interesting because it's not as if those were the only 3 mass shootings in the United States over the last couple of years. So the film was made, it was greenlit in a climate where mass shootings have been going on for decades, but they decided to make the movie now anyway. The studio released the following statement this morning. While Universal Pictures had already paused the marketing campaign for The Hunt, after thoughtful consideration, the studio has decided to cancel our plans to release the film. We stand by our filmmakers and will continue to distribute films in partnership with bold and visionary creators like those associated with this satirical social thriller. But we understand that now is not the right time to release this film. No official plans as to what happens to The Hunt now. It could come back for a theatrical release at a later date, or it could go to streaming once NBC Universal parent Comcast launches its service. The Hunt follows 12 red state strangers who wake up in a clearing and realize that they're being hunted by liberal elites. Now, this is exactly what is said in this article. I have not read this officially, but it's on Deadline, so I would assume that this is true. Betty Gilpin and double Oscar winner Hilary Swank play women on opposite sides of the political spectrum, conservative and liberal, who are targeting each other. Craig Zobel directed the movie, which was written by Nick Cuse and Damon Lindelof. President Donald Trump went after Hollywood on Friday in what was perceived by the media as an alluded slam at The Hunt, saying, you talk about racist, Hollywood is racist. What they're doing with the kind of movies they're putting out is actually very dangerous for our country. He added, what Hollywood is doing is a tremendous disturbance to our country, claimed Trump. Deadline's Dominic Patton covered the news Friday and how the town called bullshit on POTUS. I talked about this yesterday. Our sister site Variety reported this morning that Swank told reporters and former Screen Daily editor-in-chief Mike Goodridge at the Locarno Film Festival today that she would not be discussing The Hunt, saying, no one's seen the film. You can't really have a conversation about it without understanding what it's about. She did not say that it was about liberals versus deplorables. That said, Swank did have something to say about Trump and the current entertainment climate. My desire to tell certain stories has always been the same, no matter who the president is, she said. The choices that I've made pretty much inform who I am as a person, and that's not going to change no matter what's happening. Last weekend, ESPN yanked an ad for The Hunt that previously it had approved. However, AMC aired a spot for the Blumhouse movie during its season premiere of Preacher. On Wednesday, Universal, in its initial slowdown of The Hunt, decided to pause the Pix marketing campaign across outdoor digital and theatrical. Now, I understand Universal's position. In the world that we live in, there would have been a major outcry, not just from the media, but from people saying this is insensitive and all of that. Just because, oh, this week, we've had mass shootings. It's not like we haven't been having mass shootings since what, Columbine 20 years ago? But we live in this kind of a world. This is not, however, three-dimensional thinking. And I find myself frustrated by when you work on movies. I have to say, working on films, I'm not talking about trying to get them made or get the money to make them. I'm talking about actually working on films. Working on motion pictures is incredibly gratifying because we get to watch people at the top of their game all working together toward creating something greater than the sum of their parts. Which is, sure, human beings are great, but in terms of artistic endeavor, commercial endeavor, when you come together and you make movies and watching it all work, it's pretty great. And usually the product at the end is pretty great too. So this annoys me, I have to say. I'm reading about this and I totally understand where Universal is coming from. This can be seen. Everyone's going to scream how insensitive this is, as if the idea of The Dangerous Game or The Running Man or Hostel or Turkey Shoot or the idea of human beings hunting other humans or mass genocide, whether it's the Khmer Rouge, whether it was Stalin and his purges, whether it was the Nazis killing 12 million people, half of those Jews, half of them being other undesirables. Like, we've never done this. Like, humanity has never killed each other en masse. Well, but this week, anyway, it's just something that just annoys me. And then what happens is, here's what happens. The discussion about this is already being reframed as if, oh, let's blame video games. Let's blame the media, that old chestnut. It must be video games because video games desensitize people. Because playing a game, I have to say, I grew up, I played a little Dungeons and Dragons. I don't like Ren fairs. I never wanted to strap on armor and grab a sword and go fight imaginary dragons. I didn't. I know you can watch that clip of, what is it, Wizards and Warriors, the TV movie where Tom Hanks, as a young man, takes that a little far. I get it. The powers and the evil of Dungeons and Dragons. You got to watch out for that. But this kind of thing just bothers me to no end, because what it does is it takes away from the conversation. It moves the conversation to a place where it shouldn't be. Then the question then rises, well, should we be telling these kinds of stories? Because we can't make horror movies anymore. We're going to end up in a hermetically sealed society where any storytelling that has anything questionable in it at all is going to go away. Well, we came out of that era. It was the Dark Ages. We had the Inquisition. Can you imagine now? How close are we to living in The Handmaid's Tale? Is America sliding closer toward Gilead every day? Where is our common sense? I don't know. And it's something that is, it's very odd. And I'm not the only one who thought about this. I got a letter from Matt Ferguson. Matt Ferguson writes in, RMB, PGS. I wanted to get your thoughts on something that is becoming more and more divisive as we approach the 2020 presidential election. It is the soon-to-be-released movie, The Hunt. I understand that all film is subjective and that art can be interpreted in many different ways. However, with recent tragedies in Elroy, Dayton, and El Paso, is this film now hypocritical? Full disclosure, I've not seen the movie, but the premise that liberals hunt deplorables. That's what everybody thinks. That's what the Deadline article said. Can't say if that's true or not. How can this new political statement not be viewed as anything but hypocritical? I want to have an open mind to any movie, but this seems to have gone too far, and the attempted satirical take on our political division and culture of guns seems to be culturally tone deaf. Now, first of all, I don't mean to single you out, Matt, but listen to what you're saying in this letter. You say, full disclosure, I have not seen the movie, but the premise that liberals hunt deplorables. I understand that was the premise that was reported. Then you go on to say, how can this new political statement not be viewed as anything but hypocritical? Which political statement? You haven't seen the movie yet. I want to have an open mind to any movie, which you should, and you can. But this seems to have gone too far, and the attempted satirical take on our political division and culture of guns seems to be culturally tone deaf. Why would you say that? Having not seen a film, the film has not been reviewed. The only thing anybody knows about this movie is apparently humans are hunting other humans, and that it's liberals hunting deplorables, which has yet to be confirmed. Just want to say that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Matt goes on to say, should movies like this be distributed? Where is the line? Is there one? Trying to keep an open mind. So, Matt, I don't mean, first of all, thank you for writing this letter, because it came in over the transom. I was thinking about the very same thing. But again, comes back down to three-dimensional thinking. This movie is being now pilloried all over the place. First of all, it was a conservative commentator who decided it was about liberals versus deplorables. That's what they decided. And that story was now picked up by the media. That has not been debunked by Universal, and no one said anything about it. And indeed, the movie might be just that. And we don't know about its satirical take. All we've seen is a trailer, and everybody is going crazy about it. Not only that, people have already made up their minds. There's already now a witch hunt. They're going to burn this movie at the stake. Even you are asking, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And yet no one's seen the film. And this is the perfect this is what goes on in our culture all of the time. And it's the kind of thing that drives me berserk. We're constantly yelling and screaming about things, and we're not really addressing the roots or the underlying problem. It's like, I'll give you an example. Somebody once told me that if you want to solve a problem from people getting to point A to point B, there's no technology. You can give them a car. Give them a car. They can drive from point A to point B. Here you go, son. Here you go, daughter. Here's a car. You can drive from point A to point B. Well, what happens when they're driving to point B and they have a blowout? They didn't know that tires could blow out. Let's say that they know that tires could blow out and they have a jack in their car and a spare. They fix the car and they get 3/4 the where they're going, and they run out of gas. No one told them there's gas. What? Gas? You just gave me a car to travel from point A to point B. You said that's all I needed to travel from point A to point B. Well, then they get 9/10 the way there and their fan belt breaks. I didn't know there was a fan belt. What's a fan belt? So the point that was being made to me at the time was that just giving somebody a car is not solving the problem. What you have to do is you have to explain to them everything there is to know about a car before they start using it. They have to have a rudimentary understanding that it's got a combustion engine, that you need gas, you need fossil fuels, you need places to get fossil fuels, and you need places that can repair the fan belt. So it's not just having a car, it's everything that you need to not only own a car, but to support a car, to keep it going. And that's true of just about everything. So it's like, climate change. It's the same thing. Yeah, you can reduce emissions, but there's also 100 other things that you have to do to help reduce climate change, at least man-made climate change. And yet we seem to have forgotten this. However, on movie sets, they don't. When you're making movies, you got to solve these problems, and everybody's trained to think three-dimensionally, and they understand that making a film is like an organism. One department affects another department. How do we all work together? And when you're working with people that work on motion pictures, and I'm sure this is also true of other industries where anything has to be manufactured. Buildings, I would imagine, are the same way. Cars themselves, same way. Certainly spaceships require discipline from or interdisciplinary cooperation and activity. But anyway, so should movies like The Hunt get made? Well, here's the thing. Once you start questioning whether a certain story should be told or a certain movie should get made, then you're falling down. You're not even sliding down. You are falling down a slippery slope you're never going to get up, because then you're going to ask yourself, okay, well, if it's not, who's deciding? Who's going to decide which should get made and which shouldn't get made, and what criteria? And then the people how are they going to get picked? What are their backgrounds? What gives them the right or the ability to know? I mean, it's then you're winding up in a we've seen it before. The 20th century is full of the kind of societies that we can see that can develop around the very idea of whether or not a story should get told or not. So, whether Universal should look, my own opinion on this is yes, because the culture that we live in today, because of what would happen if Universal were to put it out. I mean, can you imagine the outcry? First of all, the outcry has already started. It's already been the very idea of pulling this movie from release has given it way more publicity than it had up until today when they pulled I guess it started when they decided to pull the ads, but now they pulled the film. Pretty good PR move, really. And I don't know what Tallulah just did, but she did something. And again, if they were to release it, could you keep people in theaters safe? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, as so many things are. Anyway, interesting letter, Matt. You and I are obviously thinking along the same lines. My feeling is that you had to pull the movie. You did not have a choice. You did not have a choice. You had to pull the movie in the wake of what's happened. In deference, I mean, you can't be heartless. You can't be craven and crass about your desire to make money, which is, let's face it, what any theatrically released movie is supposed to do, is to make money. And I think the whole point of the film is how ridiculous and how horrifying the idea of humans hunting other humans are. Call me crazy, but I don't think the movie is either pro-gun or pro-human hunting. I just don't think it's going to be. So perhaps it's satiric, if it is indeed satiric, or its horrific message is exactly the kind of message, ironically, that we need to hear. So I'm sad that I understand why they had to pull it. If I was in charge of Universal, I would have pulled it too. I also would have made the movie. I would have made the movie, and I'll bet you that the movie has a lot to say that we could benefit from. Anyway, those are just thoughts this Saturday morning. I got more letters to come, including a Willow Yang letter about Star Trek, the animated series, believe it or not. But JB Bonifacio is here, says someone online posted that they canceled The Hunt due to horrible reviews. I told him the only review I could find online is from Trump. Boom. Well, I haven't read any reviews either. I don't think that's the case. They don't cancel movies because of horrible reviews, as evidenced by this weekend's The Kitchen, a movie that was sitting on a shelf since last July of 2018. And it's unfortunate because The Kitchen was a film that was directed by a woman and all the department heads were women. And it's fronted by three of the most talented women working today. And I'm sorry, and it's based on a graphic novel. It's based on a Vertigo, a DC Vertigo comic. I really wanted The Kitchen to be great. It's to me, it's a bummer that it wasn't. All the talent assembled was top notch, and I think it's unfortunate that it turned out to be the way it turned out. But I hope they don't use the fact that it was a film headed up by women. That was not the reason that it failed. The gender of the people working on the film is never a reason why a movie failed. The movie just wasn't very good, unfortunately. And I would chalk that up to a first-time director. Good writer. First-time director. It's a lot to bite off. It doesn't always work out. Factual Opinion says, time for me to watch Star Trek movie. Well, Factual Opinion, yes, that might be true. Koba's here. Koba says, my favorite telling of Man Hunting Man story is the Incredible Hulk episode, The Snare. Well, Koba, that's interesting. I don't remember that one off the top of my head, but I would like to see it. By the way, if you guys want to watch some awesome Australian exploitation, I highly recommend Turkey Shoot, aka Escape 2000. I mean, it's got Hunger Games, Hunger Games is a movie about kids slaughtering other kids, but it's got a lot of Hunger Games in it, a lot of Running Man in it. It's good stuff and some great violence. Yeah, I said great violence because when you're watching exploitation cinema, why else are you watching it? You want to see some gooey gore. You want to see some crass sex. You want to see all kinds of those great things that are in exploitation films. Otherwise, why watch them? Willow Yang. By the way, you know what? It's cathartic. You watch these things, you play video games. It's how come you don't go out in real life and do them, because you know they're bad. They're bad. Willow Yang says, would you consider having the shows at a regular set time, or is your life too hectic? I've just started The Wrath of Khan when your show came on. Well, I could have them at a regular time. You know, I've been trying to do them at 1. If I did them at a regular time, it's a good idea. I should do them. 1 o'clock seems to be the time that I should do them, because, as I said, in deference to Jim, Detective Jim lost a good friend, and he will be at a funeral tomorrow for that friend. So I said I would go on at 3 o'clock our time, which gives him enough time, at least in what he told me, to get back, because he said he needed the show tomorrow. So I moved the show to 3. But today, I think 1 o'clock is going to be my regular time. That's what I'll set it now, Willow. And I can't believe you actually stopped watching Wrath of Khan and are watching this show. By the way, I wonder, are you watching the iTunes version, the new 4K version on iTunes that is actually the director's cut? I'd be curious. I don't know. Damian McCartney says, I just watched Free Enterprise last night, and I'm an even bigger fan than I was before. I only wish you could watch the best version of it. You probably watched the 4x3 version, unless you saw the 2005 version or 2006 version that was on Anchor Bay. But I very much appreciate that, because, you know, last week I talked about how somebody said they watched Free Enterprise and they had less interest in me and this channel than ever, and they were out. So thank you, Damien. First of all, thanks for supporting the channel. That was very generous of you. And I also appreciate the fact that you're an even bigger fan than you were before. Hopefully, my goal is, now it's 20 years old, I really want to get my hands on the negative of Free Enterprise, hopefully to purchase it from the man who owns it, who paid for it, my original executive producer. And I'd like to do a whole new version of the film. I want to do the Final Frontier cut, as it were, which I think would be a great thing to do. And I could make the movie better than it was, better, stronger, faster. This next letter is interesting. All these letters are interesting. I love this because it's a subject after my own heart. This one comes from Jason Manweiler. Greetings, Rob. As promised, here is my letter about Gundam. I mentioned in my last letter, I said I would be writing to you. I recently did a rewatch of Gundam Wing along with Endless Waltz, which is a Gundam Wing movie, and I forgot just how much I love that show. I know Gundam Wing is separate from the canonical Gundam universe, but I don't care. I'm not much of one for mecha anime, but Gundam Wing was gateway into the world of Gundam and mecha at large. I was wondering what you thought about Gundam Wing as a whole. I love Gundam Wing, and it has my favorite Gundam. Who your favorite pilot is, and of course, which Gundam from Gundam Wing is your favorite. My favorite pilot is Duo, and my favorite Gundam from the series is, by extension, the Death Scythe Hell. First of all, the Death Scythe is a great Gundam, and Duo is a great character, but I like the Gundam, the actual Gundam Wing, the Endless Waltz Gundam. I love it. Gundam with wings, literal angelic wings, is, I think, my favorite Gundam, and also the new Gundam from Char's Counterattack. I love to. Also, if I enjoy Wing, do you have recommendations for other Gundam series I would enjoy? Well, first of all, Gundam Wing is, as you pointed out, not part of the canonical Gundam universe, which is the Universal Century Gundam universe. If you want to catch something cool, the OVA series, Gundam The Origin, start with that, because that retells the original 79 Gundam series, the beginnings of Gundam. And it retells it. It's really well done. And so watch Gundam The Origin, and then you should jump ahead and watch Unicorn Gundam that came out, because those are great. That's a way to get up to speed. But then you could watch Gundam Origin, and then if you go back and you watch the MS, the 0083, and then Char's Counterattack and all that kind of stuff. It's or you just go start with Universal Century, the old school stuff. But admittedly, even when I go back and watch 70s Gundam, it gets a little rough. I got to show you guys something. It's kind of cool. So in 2003, I talked about this. In 2003, I found this guy online who made Gundam Lego sets. Now, here it is. It's a Gundam Lego set. It's all totally faded. This is the classic RX-78 Gundam. And he has a place. This guy, it was so cool. I never put this together. I found this in my garage last week when I was setting stuff up in the Imaginarium. I had not seen this in a long, long time. It was made in 2003. It was sent to me in 2003. He made Lego instructions. It's great. I mean, this thing is totally cool. Foundry DX. I went online. It was foundrydx.com. It doesn't look like it's been updated since 2010, but I bought this from him. I bought this from him in 2003. There's even a personalized letter in it. But I'd never built it, so I started building it. I'll show it when it's done, if I ever finish it. But it's not that big and it's not that hard to make. But I'm a huge Gundam fan. Anyway, wanted to let you know that your show has caused me to want to go back and do a deep dive into the world of Trek. I have seen most of the original series, The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, but I have never seen them all the way through, nor have I ever seen Voyager, Enterprise, or Discovery. I've seen and own all of the movies that have been released, but I want to go back from the beginning and make the trek through Trek. Always have a great day and live long and prosper. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Jason M. Well, Jason M., for those of you who don't know, the header, if you go to the website, the Burnettwork.net, and you look at this letter, the header is of the classic RX-78, a very stylized version of it, but the classic RX-78-2 Gundam. We saw that, by the way, the classic Gundam. It was in Ready Player One, and it just made me salivate for the possibilities of what a live-action Gundam movie can be. For those of you guys who don't know what Mobile Suit Gundam is, Mobile Suit Gundam is an anime franchise based on a novel, and it's basically about the futility of war. And it deals with the war that develops between the Principality of Zeon and the Earth Federation. And it's set in the future where many human beings live on these giant orbital Babylon 5 space colonies, but they're even bigger than Babylon 5, called Sides. And they decide to, the Expanse has a lot of Gundam in it. The idea of the Belters and Mars wanting to secede or be independent of Earth. Very much what Gundam is all about. And the Principality of Zeon and the people that control it go to war with Earth, essentially. And it's really interesting. And the Universal Century is the century that all the Gundam stories, the canonical Gundam stories, take place in, starting in 1975 all the way up to modern Gundam. I mean, Gundam Unicorn was a set like 100 years later. It was still in the Universal Century, but it moved like, I don't know, 80 years later or something. So check that out. I've always loved Gundam, basically because I love giant robots. Now, they're in Japan, as you all know, there are real robots and there are super robots. And real robots are mecha like Gundam that are piloted by human beings. So they're like tanks, and mobile suits are I mean, they're totally impractical. It doesn't make any sense. And I understand the whole premise. There's no verisimilitude with the idea of mobile suits. But you know what? Once you get into it, you that's the one ask. They ask you to believe that mobile suits are existing. They exist and they work. I believe them. I love them. And the real robot mecha that later became things. We saw the Veritech fighters, the Valkyrie fighters in Macross, which was Robotech. Basically the F-14s that transform into robots. Same kind of thing. Evangelion is same, also real robots. Somebody's piloting the Evas. It led to a whole. There's Vodums and there's Dugram and there's so many different Japanese mecha animes. So many that go, and then they combine them. And it's amazing. I'm just a big fan. Basically, I started liking them because I love the toys. I fell in love with super robots in the 70s because my parents would bring them die-cast ones back for me from Hawaii, and I didn't know what they were. I later found out about Go Nagai and Get a Robo and Get a Robo G and all of those great things. Grandizer and Guy King, and it's a whole rabbit hole. Anyway, thank you for your letter, Jason. But in terms of Star Trek, start at the beginning. Go back to classic Star Trek. And by the way, everybody asks me about this because it makes my gums bleed. Even though the first episode of Star Trek that was aired on September 8th, 1966 is The Man Trap. And for all of you purists like, oh, I'm going to go back and watch the first episode. The first episode of the original series is, in fact, Where No Man Has Gone Before. Start with that. That was the first pilot. Then watch The Man Trap and move through the series. And do not watch The Cage. watch the Menagerie Part 1 and 2, which incorporates the cage, because it's the greatest world building at the time that ever taken place in any science fiction television series. I keep telling people to do that, but no one ever listens. But I understand. But start from there. And you know what? I would suggest, if you're going to make your way through Trek, watch all of it. Go all the way to the end of Discovery. Watch it all, which I loved. Mark C is here. Mark C, how are you doing? Good to have you back. The kitchen would have been more interesting if it had a guy dressed in red with a horned mask. Mark C is obviously referring to the fact that the kitchen is set in Hell's Kitchen, and that's why it's called The Kitchen. And I agree. It should have been a Daredevil movie. Willow Yang says she's watching Wrath of Khan on YouTube. It's the director's cut. Good for you. That's the new restored version, as you should be watching it. Travis Rayner says, do you think J.J. Abrams or Zachary Quinto studied Leonard Nimoy or even Mark Leonard to get a feel of what a Vulcan is for the recent Trek films? Oh, I'm sure he did. But I just think that there is a complete misunderstanding of the character of Vulcans. And a friend of mine said that Vulcans have to be played by Jews. You have to have somebody who's sort of an educated Jew in order to play Vulcans. And I don't necessarily disagree. And by the way, Leonard Nimoy and Mark Leonard, they kind of look alike. I mean, what perfect casting. And I think the big mistake people make in playing Vulcans is they think Vulcans have no emotion. They think Vulcans have no emotion at all. And that isn't true. Of course, Vulcans have emotion. They came from a savage, barbaric society that they were able to save with the application of Surak's teachings of logic. They reformed their civilization and they became less bloodthirsty. And that was because of the fact that they control their emotions. They don't not have them. And it's that discipline, that thought discipline, that allows Vulcans to be who they are and why they always refer to logic. And that's what they do. And I thought Zachary Quinto, while I love him as an actor, I hated the way he played Spock in Star Trek 09. He had two modes. He was either angry and like literally angry screaming, or he was like mopey man. I didn't believe him at all. And he just was very priggish. He was a dick. Like, I hated how Zachary Quinto played Spock in Star Trek 09. Hated it. I really couldn't stand it, and I just didn't understand. Like, even when he's standing in front of the Vulcan Council, he's like, I'm not going to be a Vulcan. I'm going to go to Starfleet. I hated it so much. I really did. So they might have studied the actors. He might have studied the actors, but I would have sat down and had a long conversation with them. But I don't think J.J. Abrams knows that Vulcans have emotions. They just know how to control them. He thinks that they don't have emotions at all. And that's, as a matter of fact, most of Star Trek 09 makes very little sense to me. Why do you cast a real Russian to play Chekhov, saddle him with a stupid Russian accent to the point where the computer doesn't recognize his voice? I mean, the joke with Chekhov, we know that Walter Koenig had a silly Russian accent, but within the Star Trek universe, Chekhov was simply Russian. And the joke was, he said that everything good that humanity had was in Russia. He was he was very patriotic to the point of, and he knew it was a joke too. He did it to get everyone's goat. But when they had when they had Anton Yelchin, R.I.P., speaking with a silly Russian accent when he could actually speak Russian, to me just shows how wrong-headed and stupid Star Trek 09 really is. Because they're breaking the fourth wall to make a joke out of it. The same way that they saddled Anton Yelchin, a real Russian, with a stupid Russian accent, they made the Kobayashi Maru scene in Star Trek 09 the most inane, ridiculous, stupid scene I think I've seen in a science fiction movie, maybe ever. So stupid. Anyway, Alexander Wilson says, Jordan Peterson is the only person talking to males. What a load of crap. Go to your local boys and girls club and tell me they are not talking to males. Well, look, this was an article, and I think this article, I should have contextualized it more. It's an article where it was talking about Jordan Peterson as going internationally and speaking to audiences all over the world, speaking to predominantly male audiences around the planet, all different kinds of male audiences from all different places. But of course, there are people talking to young men all the time, starting with fathers. But yes, Boys and Girls Club, coaches, all of those things, absolutely. But you know, the people that are being radicalized online, that are sitting in these chat rooms, are usually not those people going out and talking to the mentors they find at the Boys and Girls Club, or you know, they're not playing necessarily organized sports even at school. I mean, one of my favorite teachers was also my track coach, and I found him to be, I did run track. Oof, brutal. I ran the mile and I did hurdles. Hardcore, man. Anyway, Mr. Wall, Chip Wall actually was my teacher, and he was very inspirational. And I had long conversations with him. And I think that, you know, we need more of that. I think that young men need mentors all over the place. But I think with our social media landscape the way it is, you need to get out, and you need mentors like at the Boys and Girls Club. You need to get offline and go have adventures and go out into the real world and see what's out there. But yes, Alexander, I think that's an absolutely fair point, and I should have been much more clear in what I was saying. I was speaking strictly in the social media space, because the only reason I even know who Jordan Peterson is because of social media, YouTube mostly, and then obviously online, Twitter, things like that. So I don't disagree with you at all. Now, we couldn't have another letter if it wasn't about Superman. I mean, I love the fact that Superman has now become a large discussion point on the show. So Dan Vakura disagrees with the others in the Post-Geek Singularity and says that yes, in fact, Superman does need to be fixed. And he's going to tell us. So this comes from Dan Vakura. He says, "Hey, Rob, Superman in the films needs to be fixed. And I say this as someone who really liked Man of Steel. The character himself is fine where he doesn't need to change. There's plenty of material to prove that. I strongly disagree with anyone who said that Henry Cavill's version was the first one to make him relatable and work in a modern world. That just shows those people haven't watched Smallville, the animated series, or read the comics, such as the one like Action Comics 775. That issue proves that his ideals work in a modern era. It's not the aw shucks idea that Campea complains about. To me, Smallville is the best live-action version of the character where he works in the modern day. John Schneider as Jonathan Kent is perfect, with instilling values, along with Annette O'Toole as Martha. I'm still hoping that Michael Rosenbaum gets his shot to audition to play Lex in a movie, which he has been pushing for years. Tom Welling and him will never play the characters again on TV, as they have said many times, but I digress. The box office also speaks for itself. As broken down by Deadline years ago, Man of Steel made $42.7 million after all the costs were calculated. No, that is not a typo. Its profit was less than Thor: The Dark World, Ant-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot produced by Michael Bay. I'm sure that's a big reason why Batman was put into Batman v Superman, which made a profit of $105 million. That was also only 1.1 million more than Ant-Man, and those numbers don't include money made from home video. Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Big Hero 6, and Guardians of the Galaxy all had bigger profits than Batman v Superman, which is still unbelievable to me. Warner Brothers only had to look at the box office receipts and realize that something wasn't working with the audience. As you have stated repeatedly, it's not show friends, it's show business. As a teacher, many of my students think Superman sucks. That's incredibly disappointing for me. Warner Brothers needs to get Superman right and set the character up for big success. So far, that hasn't happened, whether you like Man of Steel or not. He's a character that should inspire hope and optimism that people rally around, but I haven't seen that in a long time on the big screen. Hopefully, things can change in the future. Dan V. Well, Dan V., that's a very thoughtful letter, and I don't disagree with you. Again, I think, John was speaking specifically about Superman on the big screen. And yes, I think, as we talked about yesterday, Superman, the animated series, which ran for 3 years, and Smallville, which ran for a decade, we saw great versions of the character. Although I would say this, I don't think that while Smallville portrayed a great Clark Kent and the relationship he had with John Schneider, his dad, I don't think it showed enough Superman. It would have been really interesting to see more of the Superman character derived out of Smallville. I mean, clearly we saw it was basically Clark Kent with superpowers. But I don't necessarily disagree with you either. I think that those are very, very good points that you make. Yeah. So thanks for that letter. I think you're right. But I think what we want to see the ultimate Superman movie. We still look back at Superman, the movie from 1978, as being the definitive Superman. I mean, we do. I don't know if young people do, like people in their 20s, like, what's with these Zoptic flying effects? I don't believe in them at all. What is that? Who knows? And not to be outdone, Ian Samuels is back, and this is sort of interesting. It is a counterpoint. Ian Samuels says, Rob Meister General, as my Star Trek movie review created entertainment and talk of Superman, I thought I would do the kind of review of Superman films. But I saw Donner's 79 Superman, the movie, and I saw Batman v Superman. Oh, that's a dog. See, more people come over. Let me do that again. But I saw the Donner 70. Come on, guys. Okay. But I saw the Donner 79 Superman the movie, and that's actually 78, Superman the movie, and I saw Batman v Superman. So I decided, forget that, I'll do Batman instead, which, as a Batman fan, makes more sense. The first entry is somewhat earlier than many will expect, 1943. That's right. When war was raging in... Gilbert, please. That's right. We have friends who came over. That's right. When war was raging in Europe against Germany and its allies, you know what I have to do? It's time. You know what it's time for? You know what it's time for? Whenever Gilbert's barking, it's time for a cookie. You know it is. It's cookie time. Come here. Who's coming up? Oh, look at that. Somebody gonna come up? You gonna come up on screen? Come on. There you go. Nope. Gilbert, come here. Come on. You gotta come up. Tallulah, come up. Come up. Come on. Coming up. All right. I guess they're not gonna come up. There you go. Okay, buddy. That's one for you. Here's for Tallulah. Okay, you get another one. I love when you chew in the microphone. Don't you love that? I love that. Tallulah, one for you. Okay, you get one more. One more, buddy. No, Gilbert, this one. Come on. Gotta let him see. You gotta chew. See? And Tallulah gets one. That's it. No more. No mas. No mas, senor. No. I know, buddy. You can't have any more. Otherwise, you'll get fat. You won't be so agile in the dog park. Good boy. Good girl. Okay, everybody. There you go. Gilbert and Tallulah interlude. Stopping them barking by giving them cookies. So anyway, let's go back. The first entry is somewhat earlier than many will expect, 1943. That's right. When war was raging in Europe against Germany and its allies, and in the Pacific against Japan, a little more than 18 months after Pearl Harbor, The Batman was released. Originally released as a serial, like many live-action adventure stories at the time, the movie's starring a little-known actor named Lewis Wilson. The plot had secret American government agents, Batman and Robin, try and stop the Japanese scientist Dr. Tito Daka from stealing Gotham City's radium for his secret device. The film series marked the first appearance of the Batcave. The secret entrance to the cave was behind the grandfather clock in Wayne Manor. At this time, Alfred in the comics was a rotund gentleman. 1943's The Batman first introduced the idea of a thin Alfred who also sported a thin mustache. The Batman was re-released in 1965 as An Evening with Batman and Robin, which inspired the making of the 1966 TV series. There was another serialized Batman story, The New Adventures of Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder, also known as Batman and Robin, in 1949. While 1943's The Batman only saw Batman and Robin driven around in a limousine, the 1949 Batman and Robin almost gave us the first Batmobile as they drove around in a 1949 Mercury. The plot has Batman and Robin facing down the Wizard. The Wizard can control all electrical devices, including cars, and it was the first appearance of Jim Gordon. The first appearance of Vicky Vale, Also, Vicky Vale has a brother called Jimmy, who is one of the Wizard's henchmen. Then we get the tour de force, 1966's Batman the Movie. So much was crammed into this one, which followed the first 2 seasons of the TV series, which ran on ABC television. Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb. You get Bat Shark Repellent, the Batmobile, the Bat Cycle and the Sidecar, the Bat Boat, and the Bat Copter all in one movie. The United Underworld, with Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, Cesar Romero as the Joker, Frank Gorshin as the Riddler, and Lee Merriweather as Catwoman, all in one movie. Kidnapping, dehydrating people, Batman and Robin dehydrated by the Penguin, but accidentally rehydrated with hard water from the Batcave's nuclear power cell. Just how much more can you crowbar into one Batman movie? We were left a long time in the wilderness before we got the failed trilogies. In Batman, Tim Burton brought us our first dark look at Gotham City and the first Dark Knight in movies. Michael Keaton was our new Bat Beetlejuice man, and after such a long wait, it just had to be Batman against his arch enemy, the Joker, and Jack Nicholson was excellent. There was quite a bit of retconning that went on. We got to see the birth of Batman with his eyewitnessing the murder of his parents, but also roping in Joker's backstory into it. Many fans of the comics were uncomfortable with these new background stories, but much of it was brought into the comics later. Gotham City celebrating its bicentennial, announced by Billy D. Lando Williams as Harvey Dent. The celebrations are hijacked by the Joker. At the same time, you have a bizarre love triangle. Vicky Vale becomes obsessed with Bruce Wayne and Batman, and Joker becomes obsessed with Vicky Vale. Spoiler, Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker, is killed at the end. Made for $45 million, it made $413 million. Batman Returns doesn't play as well. Michelle Pfeiffer does well as Selena Kyle Catwoman, but Danny DeVito's grotesque version of the Penguin is not so well received. But we did get Christopher Walken as Selena's boss, Max Schreck. Budget of $80 million, still made just short of $283 million, but came at a time that Warner Brothers had some big losses. Due to Batman Returns' lack of success compared to 1989's Batman, Burton didn't get to complete his trilogy, and so we didn't get a standalone Catwoman movie featuring Michelle Pfeiffer. Eventually, we got Halle Berry's Catwoman, and the less said about that, the better. Joel Schumacher was then given the reins for a new, more lighthearted, campier Batman, or at least that was the orders from the studio. Even Schumacher wanted to do it dark. For Batman Forever, Schumacher was given $100 million. Val Kilmer took on the mantle of the Bat, but came across as stilted and wooden, and just didn't look comfortable as either Bruce Wayne or Batman. This is also where Harvey Dent had some horrible accident off-screen after seeing him played by Billy D. in 1989. Dent now reappears as Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face, and that completely misses the mark, missing the dark nuances of the Harvey Dent character. We also got Jim Carrey, as always, playing Jim Carrey, this time wearing a Riddler costume. We also get the introduction of Chris O'Donnell as Robin. Kind of a fun movie, but badly written. Still, it made $336.5 million. The best thing to come out of this film was the soundtrack that included artists such as Michael Hutchence, Nick Cave, and U2, but also the excellent Seal song with Kiss from a Rose. I am not taking away from the much maligned soundtrack from the 89 Batman. I'm a huge Prince fan and love that soundtrack. Slightly increased budget to $125 million for 97's Batman and Robin, taking the camp to a whole new level and including the famous bat nipples. The dressing scene in that film was weird. Close-up of bat nipples, close-up of bat butt. Joel, you need professional help, or he doesn't. But it gets worse. Bat credit card, the Uber pun Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze and Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy. Also, blink and you'll miss it, Bane as Ivy's henchman. Alicia Silverstone introduced as Batgirl, but not the Batgirl we know. It isn't Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter. Instead, we get Barbara Pennyworth, Alfred's niece. Badly written, ridiculously over the top, makes Adam West look like the Dark Knight. Saying that, George Clooney as Bruce Wayne looked almost like he was born to play the part, but not Batman. The film made $283 million. Then the one I expect many have been waiting for. We finally get a complete trilogy, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, starting with Batman Begins in 2005. Now, I didn't really like this. It was well written. Liam Neeson was pretty good as Ra's al Ghul, but Cillian Murphy as Jonathan Crane, a.k.a. Scarecrow, felt like it was crowbarred in just as another bad guy for Batman to face. Gary Oldman worked as Gordon, gives a hint of Joker in the second film. My biggest problems with this trilogy is Christian Bale's croaky Batman voice, which comes across as more silly than intimidating. The Tumbler, although impressive, made no sense to me. Why is Batman driving around in a tank? Why would the first Batmobile be a tank and then replaced by a car? Then the Piece de Resistance, The Dark Knight, many mistakes, including a still croaky Batman Bale, but an epic performance from Heath Ledger. This was a different Joker for a different age, but the performance was sublime. Every scene with Heath Ledger in it makes the film well worth watching. but Harvey Dent and Two-Face is once again not done justice. It felt like the Harvey Dent descent and becoming Two-Face should have been told in a separate film, not tagged onto this Joker plot storyline. The final part of Nolan's trilogy is The Dark Knight Rises, and does he? I don't think he does. The Dark Knight sinks, I don't suppose would sell well. Impossible escape at the end, and Bruce Wayne sunning himself on a beach just doesn't seem like Bruce Wayne at all. People rave about Tom Hardy's Bane, but to me, he just isn't Bane. The Nightfall storyline in the comics and the great trilogy of graphic novels is poorly adapted for this film. The film seems to show that Bruce Wayne spends about a month hanging upside down, and that repairs a broken back. So much about this film is bad. For true Batman fans, I'm going to give two honorable mentions: Mask of the Phantasm and Sub-Zero, two animated movies made by the same people who've done the Batman the Animated Series. Both really are well written, particularly Sub-Zero, which tells the tragic tale of Mr. Freeze better than any other, and certainly better than Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze. This has been a long letter, but one last thing. What do people think of the future of Batman in the movies? We are expecting another reboot with the Batman in 2021, with Twilight's Robert Pattinson as Batman and potentially David Tennant as the Riddler. Any thoughts? Ian. Well, Ian, thanks for that letter. Thanks for that summation of the Batman movies. I lived through all those. Obviously, I wasn't born when the first Batman movie came out, but I certainly enjoyed watching it. I thought it was great. And let's see. I've got a letter. As you all know, I love when Willow Yang writes me letters. Now, for those of you who might be new, who don't know, I don't know why you wouldn't know, because I talk about her all the time. I've never met Willow Yang. If she walked by me in the street and said hello, I wouldn't recognize her voice. I wouldn't know her. I don't know her. I only know her through emails, and I know her through her interaction on Twitter when she writes in the John Campy show. I really don't know her. However, I feel I kind of do know her because of the wonderful letters she writes. And first of all, I feel terrible that I've taken her away from watching Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. But Willow Yang has written me a letter about Star Trek, the animated series, and I just know you people want to hear that letter. I know you do. And by the way, all of the letters that I write are up, or write. I don't write them. You write them. All of the letters that people write to me that I read on the show are available at the Burnettwork.net to go reread, and you can comment on and interact with the letter writers. If they look at their comments, but they're all up there and you can comment on them. So you don't just have to comment on the show below on YouTube, but you can go to the website, and I encourage you to do so because it gets more interactive every day. There's the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery. If you want to put something up there, I encourage that. You can support the channel up there on the website, or you can read these letters and comment on them. I noticed that the picture that we have for Willow's letter is actually backwards, but that's okay. You can go point that out too. I apologize for that. Mike, it's backwards. Anyway, this is Willow Yang's assessment of Star Trek, the Animated Series. Greetings, Rob. Since I've recently discussed Turnabout Intruder, I thought I should send over my long overdue report on Star Trek, the Animated Series. While I might revisit some of the individual episodes for a more in-depth analysis sometime down the road, I would like to give my overall impressions of the show first. I will start with my main criticism of the animated series, which is that the animation itself isn't the greatest, at least not by modern standards. I'm glad that we've had the discussion over the issues of verisimilitude and the lack of emotion with the photorealistic animals in the Lion King remake. It has helped me process the problems that I have with the animated series. The characters feel very stiff. There is just personality missing in their facial expressions. When they speak, their mouths tend to move in a restricted manner, and that's often not synced to the words that they are uttering, while the rest of their faces remain stiff, with only the occasional blink or raised eyebrow. And while some of the drawings, Spock, Sulu, McCoy, for instance, do bear recognizable resemblance to their live-action counterparts, I do feel Kirk's appearance is a little too generic. There's just something missing in his facial features that would immediately cause me to think of William Shatner. I can't exactly pinpoint it, but I think part of it might just be that his animated self is missing the personality and charisma that I associate with Kirk. And perhaps it's due to some latent prejudice that I'm not consciously aware of, but I cannot tell the difference between any of the Klingon characters. They all look the same to me. In spite of the somewhat lackluster animation, however, there is still plenty to like about the animated series. I really appreciated that the original cast, minus Walter Koenig, was brought back for the voice acting. Hearing the familiar voices of the characters from the original series brings a feeling of comfort and lends an air of credence to the show being a true continuation of the original. I also appreciated the revisiting of various past events. One small gripe I have with the original series is that I feel the episodes are sometimes too self-contained. Some significant things happen throughout the series. Kirk loses his brother in Operation Annihilate. He loses several love interests, most notably Edith Keeler in The City on the Edge of Forever. The Enterprise encounters numerous races and beings with groundbreaking powers and technologies. They leave a number of civilizations in the midst of mass social reform, and yet the main crew don't appear affected by any of the incidents, nor do they revisit them. Apart from the occasional casual reference, the majority of the events from previous episodes are ignored and seem largely inconsequential. I was thus pleased to see the animated series bring back things like The Guardian of Forever, The Recreational Planet from Shore Leave, Cyrano Jones and his Tribbles, hashtag Justice for Tribbles, amongst others. This brings a sense of continuity that I feel is sometimes missing in the original series. Being animated also enables the show to be freed from some of the technical and budgetary constraints that the live-action series had to deal with. I was glad to finally see Spock's Selah, which he had alluded to in Journey to Babel. Actually, it's Journey to Babel, but Babel is a different episode from Deep Space Nine. Although I do miss Chekhov, I'm delighted to see more alien crew members like the tripedal Erex and the felinoid Emres, or I say Mres. I just say Mres, not Emres. It's Mres. The general lack of diversity in species in the original series has been a bit disappointing to me. I do realize that there are practical considerations that need to be taken into account when determining the makeup of the crew. Different races of aliens will obviously have different social and biological needs, but I get a kick out of seeing more intraspecific interactions. I guess that's interspecific interactions. Additionally, the animated series is able to depict fanciful events like Kirk's magic duel in the Magics of Megas 2, the shrinking of the crew in the Territon incident, and Kirk and Spock being turned into the fish monster from The Shape of Water in the Ambergris element. Of course, some of the animation and effects do look a little cheesy nowadays, but I really enjoyed seeing more whimsical and outlandish stories being shown on screen. On the subject of the writing, the animated series does feel lighter than its predecessor. Much of the more adult innuendos, such as Kirk's dalliances with human and humanoid females, have been toned down. In spite of being made friendlier towards a slightly younger demographic, however, the series still doesn't shy away from headier concepts and challenging issues. The themes and moral lessons in the stories feel very much consistent with the original series. Episodes like The Infinite Vulcan and The Magics of Megas 2 present moral quandaries on free will and the rights of individuals. The Counterclock Incident deals with aging and retirement. How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth makes some interesting commentaries about theism. On the side of the more wondrous and whimsical, there are planet-destroying clouds, sentient alien plants, giant rock monsters, negative universes, and a host of other wacky things, some less plausible than others. There are also plenty of misconceptions with regards to molecular biology and genetics, fields that weren't well advanced during the time the series was created, but I will probably address that some other day. I would expect nothing less. I would like to conclude this letter by thanking James M. for writing in to recommend the series to me. To be honest, I had originally intended on skipping the animated series in the interest of time, and I'm glad now that I hadn't. While the animation does leave something to be desired, the writing certainly more than makes up for the show's technical shortcomings. In spite of its altered medium and lighter tone, it remains a worthy continuation of the original series, which would have otherwise concluded on the less than stellar, albeit wildly entertaining, Turnabout Intruder. Instead, we are left with a touching line from the aging Captain Robert April in The Counterclock Incident. What a blessing to be able to live one's life over again, if the life you've led has left you unfulfilled. Now that is a nice note to sign off on. Yours sincerely, Willow. Well, Willow, I've always been a supporter and a staunch defender of the animated series, so I thank you for that lovely letter. I completely agree with you. Look, everyone has always said that the biggest problem with Star Trek, the animated Star Trek, is the animation. They reuse shots over and over again, and you're basically looking at the same catalog of shots. They would do new shots specifically for the show specific things. And yet I think episodes like Yesteryear, which is really what Gene Roddenberry considered the only canonical episode of the animated series, or other episodes really interesting. I think that Slaver Weapon, Larry Niven's Slaver Weapon, is really interesting because it's really the first Star Trek crossover with his Known Space. I think it's his Known Space series of books introducing the Kazinti. And what's really interesting about that is, he brought in his own IP and crossed it with Star Trek. And then they picked it up for like Starfleet Battles, which was Starfleet Battles was a very famous game amongst Star Trek fans from the late 70s. It was a strategy, sort of a role-playing game. It was really interesting. I really like Starfleet Battles, but the Kazinti were in it, and they took that from the animated series. And I thought that was really interesting that Larry Niven wrote his own IP into Star Trek. I would love to have seen the Kazinti developed more. I think that would have been really, really cool if, in fact, that had happened. But unfortunately, it didn't. But I really like the animated series. I think there's a lot to love. And yes, I understand the animation is not good, but a lot of the writers for the animated shows wrote for the original series. So there are a lot of great episodes. I mean, episodes I like, Beyond the Furthest Star, I really like, of course, Yesteryear and Slaver Weapon. I liked Bem and Albatross and the Counterclock Incident, The Survivor, and Time Trap. There's a lot of really fun episodes. I wasn't so big on the sequel episodes, More Tribbles, More Troubles, A Mud's Passion, those kinds of things, although it was nice to see those characters come back. But yeah, there's only 22 episodes of the animated series, and each episode is only 22 minutes long, so you can get through them pretty quickly. Interestingly enough, they're actually making 2 new Star Trek animated shows right now. And the first is called Lower Decks, and Lower Decks is supposedly dealing with what happens when Kirk and company leave from, say, a first contact mission, and Starfleet follows up with what they're calling a second contact mission. And hopefully, if it's not just played for laughs, it could be a really interesting show. I don't know if it's going to be that interesting. Who knows? But I'd like to think it will be. Maybe. And if not, well, what are you going to do? Anyway, that is the end of the letters for this show. And I think that means I'm going to bring this chat number 193, my God, to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank my moderating staff, Greg, Mike, and Detective Jim, for being great moderators and making this place a very fun place to be. And I want to thank everyone for being part of the Post-Geek Singularity, being good imagination connoisseurs, and all of that. I also want to send a shout out to my moderator, Detective Jim Boyers, whose very good friend passed away, and he has to attend his friend's funeral tomorrow. Cancer is a bitch. So my thoughts are with you, Jim, and I hope everybody else's are with Jim. It's tough to lose somebody. I've lost people to cancer. It's never easy. It is a very horrible thing to have to deal with. But anyway, I want to thank you all and remind you that, of course, these chats are brought to you by Get Lucky Tiger, men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and punch in PGS when you check out, you can get 20% off your order. I will be back on tomorrow at 3 o'clock Pacific time, a little later for everybody if you're on the other side of the world, but want to have Jim back here, so I will be back on 3 o'clock our time. I will not be on the John Campea show on Monday because he will still be in Canada. He went back home to visit his family, so I'll be back on Tuesday and Wednesday on the John Campea show, but I'll be back here on Monday at noon. And once again, I want to thank everybody for their support of the channel and support of the website. I very much appreciate that. And then I'm going to bring this chat number 193, to a close. So once again, thank you all very much. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to you, have a better day.